Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. We're going to talk about something we don't talk about often, Solana. And to do that, we have Brian and Hadley with us. Do you guys want to quickly introduce who you are and what you do at the companies that you're at? Maybe Hadley, we'll start with you.
Sure, yeah. So I noticed it says co-founder and CEO up there, to which the CEO and co-founder would probably be upset. So I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Marinade. Been there for about a year, helping the Marinade protocol scale to institutions for Solana staking. Great to be here.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm Brian. I lead the Jito Foundation, and I've been with Jito for almost 3 years now. Jito is a primary infrastructure provider for Solana that crosses MEV infrastructure, Jito tip service, as well as the largest liquid staking token on Solana, Jito Sol, which has roughly 2.5 billion in TVL, and the newly launched restaking product.
Cool. Well, I'm going to start very basic and start from the fundamentals until we get to the current state of things. I'm going to ask why your companies exist. Okay, so why your companies exist? Like, why does Marinade exist? Why does Jito exist? What are these problems that you guys are solving that you think are important for the network? So let's start with Marinade.
Yeah, sure. So Marinade started 3+ years ago, so it's really a kind of Solana OG company. And the original problem the co-founders were trying to solve was twofold. One was, at that time, there was a bit of a centralization problem on Solana. So making sure that there was a protocol, Marinade, that can help support as many validators as possible, being able to operate their business. And then the other side of it was people who want to stake to be able to get the highest yield possible with the most secure validators. So that was the original premise of Marinade, the original launch of MSOL, which was, I believe, basically the first liquid staking token on Solana. I'd say now that continues to be the case, where we serve an important place in the validator ecosystem, allowing multiple validators to receive stake that they can't get from other places. And then with our recently launched stake auction marketplace, allowing people to get the highest yield that they can, generally speaking, from a staking provider. So that's why we exist.
And Jito really started from the MEV side. So the co-founders of Jito, Lucas and Zano, saw that low-fee blockchains have a problem where MEV creates significant negative externalities, principally spam. And that was like inspired by looking at Polygon, BSC back in the day in 2020, and that there's just a lot of problems that are created by MEV. For anyone unaware, MEV is effectively kind of like short-term arbitrage or the competition to land transactions for some profit motive. And so they, saw the problem, were extremely bullish on Solana, wanted to build a project, and then were inspired by what Flashbots had built on Ethereum and decided that Solana needed some solution like this as it continues to scale. And so they really built up the marketplace for how MEV should be harvested and, really kind of democratizing the profits of MEV and trying to minimize the externalities. And so that was where all of the original engineering effort was derived from. And then staking is kind of hand in hand with MEV and also making sure that stake is used for good. And so those two products were launched in tandem and continue to evolve on Solana. This MEV side of the house has generated over 1 billion in profits that are distributed to validators and stakers since then. And the Jito Sol stake pool is a key tool in helping drive the direction of how MEV works on Solana.
Cool. Well said. And so, okay, that's what problems your companies solve, and you both have considerable traction. Hadley, you talked about institutional staking. What exactly does that mean? What do you mean institutional staking? What makes something institutional? What are the things that you need to optimize for? How does that differ from regular staking?
It's a great question. I think it's a relevant question not only for Solana staking, but also for the crypto world writ large. And this sort of, these two worlds, DeFi and TradFi, which I feel are kind of like two separate worlds that each have their own expertise, but don't speak each other's language. And that's in the case of staking for institutions as well, particularly as you get to the higher tier of something like an ETF and how an ETF is going to approach staking and a staking provider. So, generally speaking, institutions care about three things in this order. They care about regulatory status, security, and then the end reward. So when you're speaking to institutions and when you speak about institutional staking, you have to understand the language of regulatory approval for many of these institutions to actually stake, whether that be an individual family office, whether that be a fund, or whether that be an ETF. And then from a security standpoint, again, we were speaking about SOC 2 in the little green room there. SOC 2 is not something that DeFi companies ever think of going through, but it's kind of a table stakes requirement for institutions, and then reward finally. So my hope is over time, the two worlds of DeFi and TradFi will merge, and TradFi will learn the best of DeFi innovation and speed to market, but also DeFi will learn the best practices of true security from an institutional point of view. So that's what we mean when we say institutional staking.
Cool. And Brian, you guys at Jito are also doing some work in regulatory, maybe more B2B type of stuff. You hired Rebecca as chief legal, who's a beast. I saw Lucas wearing a suit in Washington, New York, somewhere important. So you guys seem to be kind of maybe heading in that direction in some regards. What are your efforts in the institutional side or regulatory?
Yeah, like institution is like kind of a bad term. It effectively just means not retail, which is relevant in the context of like probably 80% of crypto activity is retail at the moment, especially depending on the chain. So, but like, institutional, as I think of it in practice, it just means anyone who's not self-custodying their soul. So like whether you're using Anchorage or Coinbase or Fireblocks, like all of those, which is a very broad bucket of like fast money liquid funds that are getting for yield, or VCs that bought Solana at pennies on the dollar back in 2020. And then obviously like the far end of the spectrum is what Hadley said about ETFs. And so they all have different considerations, but it's very important to match them. But it's also important, I mean, Rebecca, the chief legal officer of Jito Labs, talks about this a lot, that we educate the new parties about the benefits of crypto, and that it needs to be a give and take as it is in any relationship. And so making sure that, we come forward and show them why DeFi existed in the first place, because none of us are here for the vision of, just doing something on JPM chain, which is like not real. And so there are a lot of benefits, and I think institutions need to adapt to how crypto works and to get the actual benefits of it. So we're really in the education process and having those conversations.
Cool. I think I will gradually start becoming more spicy. Hopefully you're warmed up somewhat. So you guys both have staking pools, liquid staking pools. A question I often get, for some reason, but I do get it, which is, okay, which one do I use, right? So can you maybe talk about the strategy behind your liquid staking pools that you both have, Marinade and Jito, and why perhaps people should use them?
Yeah, so from
over alternatives.
Yeah, or alternatives. Yeah, no, it's one of the things that I think's very healthy about the Solana ecosystem is people have a lot of different choices for validators. They can go to an individual validator, and there's within the individual validator sphere, there's a plethora of options, and then they can go to something like, Marinade innovated and started, which was this multi-validator pool option. I think the argument to go for a pooled option is a few points. One is no risk. We mitigate any risk of uptime. So in order for a validator to participate in Marinade, they have to provide a bond. We call it protected staking rewards, which basically covers any downtime. So that sort of solves that issue, and that's one of the reasons why we're able to squeeze a little higher APY. And the other reason is that you just want diversity of validators. If you go with a single validator and they go down, you're lost. Another reason is more philosophical. You're basically supporting decentralization. So, services like ours and Jito allow smaller validators to actually exist and participate. And I think that's going to become more important as you see the foundation step away from its validator matching program over time. So I think those are the arguments. And then for us, because we operate a stake auction marketplace where validators bid for the right to receive stake every epoch, there is some financial incentive as well, where we're, generally, 10 to 50 basis points higher than most validators out there, which is beneficial to people.
Yeah, I think Jito Soul is shares many of the attributes that Hadley mentioned, right? It delegates to over 200 validators on Solana, quite a substantial delegation. They're all not in the super minority. They all have very competitive fees and yields, and they all have a demonstrated track record of being very performant. And then I think the other benefit of Jito Sol is just it gives you the opportunity to earn additional yield on your Sol. Like obviously classically, you know, that's in DeFi, and that's true. Like Jito Sol is probably the biggest asset in every leading DeFi protocol on Solana. So to the extent you want that, the other benefits there are its instant liquidity. And I think relevant to this audience is something that, you know, the common refrain is, oh, well, like institutions don't use DeFi. They don't care about any of this. But there's an entire flywheel of like off-chain DeFi equivalents, and a yield-bearing token like Jito Sol is also very useful for that. And so it looks like, you know, off-chain margin lending, which is comparable to DeFi and has a lot of the same utility, or you can be doing the funding trade versus a centralized exchange, or just if you're an ETF and you need capacity for withdrawals in your product, then a liquid staking token like Jito Sol is best suited to provide immediate liquidity for that in very substantial size. And so the benefits are actually very similar across retail and institution, just the mechanisms which it's implemented are slightly different.
Mert, do you mind if I interject and then ask you a question in response? Because I'm curious.
Whoa.
I think you have a little bit of knowledge to share, if I'm correct. So, you know, one of the things that we noticed in the marketplace that it'd be great to get everyone's insight on is liquid staking versus native staking. So that's why we introduced Marinade Native about a year ago, where instead of the LST MSOL, people can stake directly natively, which has a couple of advantages, we think, for institutions. One is way less smart contract risk. You know, that's a primary one. And the secondary one is because of the way Solana is designed with delegate and withdrawal authority, the holder retains custody over their Solana. We're just pointing to the different validators. But I was wondering, based on both your experience, what you think of, how you think of native staking and LSTs for both retail and institutional users, or just in general.
Well, so yeah, I mean, obviously there's smart contract risk, although I suspect that that program is so widely used and enshrined at this point, unofficially, that if something were wrong with it, there would probably be some social changes, let's say. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. I think like liquidity, tax purposes, these are the things that the bigger boys generally think about when I talk to them about the LSTs, at least ours, because ours is not. Ours is a result of me being annoyed that I had to wait 2 days to unstake. And I was like, you know what? We should just have an LST so I can swap out instantly if I need to. That was it. No other work. Which sounds ridiculous, and it is, but it ended up working. But it's hard to say. I think this maybe goes back into the conversation around the SIMD 228 around issuance and the staking yield being, or the nominal yield, let's say, being pretty high. So I think it was surpassing 9%, 10% APY at some point during certain presidents launching coins on it, for example. And so then that begs the question, it's like, okay, do I really need to do anything else? Do I really need the liquid side to this, or I can just park it here and I have no risk, roughly? But I think a lot of it is downstream of that talk, and it's unclear how long the issuance of Solana is currently going to stay this high. But I was actually going to ask about that next. But Brian, unless you have some other thoughts on the dichotomy.
Yeah, I just think that the liquidity benefits of liquid staking, whether you are using it to earn additional yield, like Mert said, obviously there's opportunities for both on-chain and off-chain incremental yield, but just the optionality to exit that position for virtually no slippage at any given time has a lot of value for a variety of different players for different reasons, right? Retail wants it. ETF issuers really, really need it. And so that is like the core benefit. And then you look at like kind of the downsides, and when you actually dig into them, they are quite small. So like the smart contract risk, I mean, It's the most Lindy contract on all of Solana. It has had billions in TVL effectively since Genesis and remains strong. It has every possible audit under the sun, and it's, getting closer to actually being frozen. There's like always concerns about like security risk, but we put out a report saying that Jito Sol is clearly not a security and laid out why that's true. There's tax risk, but like once you dig into it, and there's more information coming soon from us on that, but like there's not actually any tax consequences of LST versus native staking. And so it's effectively a free option on liquidity and the additional utility in one very unified and fungible format that has comparable yield to the majority of staking options on Solana.
Cool. One other thing I want to talk about is we're on obviously staking summit. So staking and particularly staking yields on Solana are, I didn't actually think this was a real thing, but apparently it is. People see the higher number and they think, oh, this is a better asset to hold or something. That you're seeing all these Sol strategy plays trying to be like basically the next micro strategy on Sol. And like the big yield has a big part of that. Now, there's a few sources of that yield. Let's start with the easy one, which is issuance. So Solana just a few months ago now, still have PTSD from it, but 228 did not pass, which was going to reduce Solana's issuance, and it didn't. I'm curious what your guys' thoughts on that proposal was, and if you think there actually needs to be some change to issuance.
I mean, there was a lot in what you said. I think just starting first with this idea of, like, I think it's interesting to think about a high yield, even though we think we're, objective human beings, being attributed to the success of an underlying token. Like, oh, if this thing is 10%, maybe that will make me more likely to buy the underlying token, not only because of the yield, but if it's earning 10%, it's got to be better than the earning 2 or 3%. So I think that's probably an accurate observation, and maybe long-term a bit of a challenge for Solana because it all has to be done, responsibly. I was, I think Marinade's official position was supportive of 228. I think the stance of the company was kind of move fast and break things as the Solana ethos, and a lot of 228 made a lot of sense. Personally, I wasn't for it because I just felt like, the sort of VC-driven entity behind where 228 came from made me a little uncomfortable in terms of, potential conflicts of interest or understanding, was this really, is this really about Solana's long-term health? So I'm personally glad that it was brought up and that we had the healthy debate as a community. I'm also glad that it didn't pass, but that the conversation is continuing.
Yeah, I was fairly strongly in favor of SIMD 228. I think that Solana is an $80 billion plus network, hopefully soon multiples of that, and we shouldn't be optimizing the entire network around the irrational views of certain people that don't understand nominal inflation. It's too important. We have a lot of things to do. I think the other thing that wasn't really discussed sufficiently in the conversation was the same concerns that were raised about changing it now in terms of, oh, well, like, is inflation going too low? Will we be able to support validators? That is already happening and enshrined in the code. And the elegance of the market-based mechanism that was introduced with SIMD 228 means that there's actually an enduring solution to that problem. So we're effectively kicking the can. And if you believe that there are times where the security budget will be insufficient, then we should find a market-based balancing mechanism over what it should be indefinitely. And that is now we face that problem as the inflation curve continues to decline. And so there's going to have to be a change to the inflation schedule. And this should have been a permanent fix to everything around Solana inflation. Maybe there are certain parameters that could be tweaked if it ended up being, after we see it implemented. But in general, that it was an elegant mechanism, but really the first of its kind in crypto that I'm aware of for that exact type. And I'm guessing that we see it resurface later this year and will probably pass in similar formats then.
Anything to add to that? No?
Sorry?
Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't.
Okay. Cool.
You?
No, I was for it. Again, PTSD. I'm okay for now.
We move on.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about something way worse. Let's talk about sandwiching. Huh? Okay, so there's a bunch of problems here. I will list out a few. Well, one is that, because part of the staking yield obviously comes from MEV, and as a result, sandwiching, although it's actually quite complex on Solana because the sandwiching is done by private entities who don't share it with, let's say, the Jito system. As a result, it's not democratized. They actually just take it, these kind of shady type of actors. What do you think needs to be done around sandwiching on Solana is number one. And then I think the attention span is going to be a little short here, so I'll ask the follow-on after.
Yeah, so I think I know where you're going. On Solana, that's kind of above my pay grade. I mean, it's blockchains are open networks and people participate in those networks, and when they find a loophole, they can solve it. So I'm not quite sure on the Solana protocol level. At Marinade, we had this challenge with the stake auction marketplace where we had nefarious validators come in and take advantage of using sandwiching attacks to, game the system, so to speak. And so we reached out to the community, presented a solution, which is basically a kind of blacklisting model for those validators. But the problem is it's a kind of a game of whack-a-mole where, one validator shows up, you block them, another one shows up. So we've got it under control now versus where it was, but we'd like to see, some creative community solutions at the Solana level to really solve this for the ecosystem.
On the Solana level, it's very hard, and without getting into the nitty-gritty, the transaction supply chain, it's very hard to attribute who is doing what and where the nefarious behavior is coming from. But the community is aligned to work towards solutions. Jito, Labs, and myself personally both feel strongly that sandwiching is antithetical to putting NASDAQ on the blockchain, because if a user is getting worse execution on-chain versus on Binance, then they're going to stay on Binance, full stop. And that's not why we're here. So Jito Labs deprecated the mempool, which was help enabling this in the early days, in favor of trying to minimize the amount of sandwiching. I think there are levers that stakers can pull to help minimize sandwiching in the near term until some of these protocol and app level changes take place. That looks like having, for Jito, the community has voted to blacklist a handful, or not a handful, but roughly 50 validators that there's demonstrable evidence of them engaging in malicious behavior. And that sets a precedent of, if you do this, then you will lose stake. And as stakers, we need to be voting with our stake. And then other examples are having criteria that weed out kind of the whack-a-mole problem, which is you have to wait a significant period of time before you can get stake. So if someone gets caught sandwiching, then they're cut off from stake. They can't just spin up a brand new validator and reiterate and do the same process again. And I definitely encourage all large stakers on Solana to take similar measures.
So I believe on the last validator call, the Ghost team who tracks sandwiching said something like the top and sandwichers, I forget the exact number, get 75% of stake from this auction from Marinade. What are you guys doing to, so it says you seem to have a maybe blacklist model, but what's been the community feedback on how to go about this problem?
Well, I'm not sure when that last call was, but I assume that was, when we were first seeing this issue with the stake auction marketplace. We launched the marketplace about 6 months ago. So, it's obviously a new innovation. No one else has done this model where instead of, what we were doing previously was the original innovation of Marinade, which is we take user Solana and distribute it to multiple validators based on uptime and security, making sure that no validator gets no more than 2% of stake. So that was the innovation that Marinade started with Solana staking. And then we decided to experiment with the launch of the stake auction marketplace. And then as things happen in marketplaces that are open, the sandwiching attacks occur. It's nowhere near 75% now. Again, we've introduced this, this blacklisting model to temper that and avoid that. And we're, very aggressively going after it as much as we can. We'd love to work with others in the community like Jito, like yourself, to continue to solve that even more.
Is that right? No?
I think there's just questions of if optimizing for the highest possible short-term yield is at tension with the long-term health of the underlying crypto network. And, that yield is coming from validators, which are powering the actual network and need to survive to invest in good operations or to maintain a decentralized validator set. And we also know there's significant capital available for engaging in malicious activities, which is unfortunate that Solana enables that, but we know it is. And so there's a tension between short-term profits and long-term health. And I think Jito has tried to be diligent in striking the balance of, providing healthy income to support the best validators on Solana, while also giving very competitive yield to stakers. And that, competing on yield is just somewhat of a slippery slope in our opinion, which is why Jito has never been in that model.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair observation. I think this is the beauty of marketplaces. So, we invented the notion of pooled staking on Solana. Jito took it, has that model as well. The stake auction marketplace isn't about short-term yield. It's really about creating an efficient marketplace where right now in the Solana ecosystem, there is a bit of a disparity, especially in the meme coin craze that we had around how much validators were earning and not able to return to end users, which is why I think you saw SIMD 123. So, we're happy to see it solved at the Solana ecosystem layer, but just like it's not, fair for people to make money off sandwich attackers, we don't think it's right now, and this is why the stake auction marketplace functions, we don't think there's a balance between what validators are able to earn in this particular market and what an end staker should be able to receive. And it's just a marketplace, and that's why it's working.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm going to talk about decentralization. Okay. So one of the biggest critiques of Solana in the past, although maybe not so much since the central servers took over, has been decentralization. And particularly, Solana has particularly high node requirements, but really the node requirements are a red herring. It's maybe more so the break-even stake that you need for the network to operate sustainably. What do you guys think about some of the critiques of Solana's decentralization and the validator cost model and economics?
I think the critiques, the underlying problem is no one knows what decentralization means besides whatever Ethereum has and Solana doesn't is mainly the leading theory. But decentralization is not really a problem for Solana. That doesn't mean there's not areas for improvement. There are, roughly 1,500, 2,000 validators at any given time. A good amount of those are very strong validators that do good work. There's a good amount of those that are either duplicate validators or not meaningfully contributing to network security. And so I think the good news is that Solana is generating more economic activity than any other crypto network, including Ethereum mainnet, for the last 6 months. And that looks on pace to continue, which means that there is ample capital available to fund a good validator set. There's a lot of fixed cost of running the validator, namely the cost of voting is actually the biggest one. It's not the hardware, which is what everyone likes to talk about. There are protocol changes intended to fix that. Timing should be hopefully not too long. And so that is a major unlock for decentralization. And then the Solana Foundation delegation program was an important tool in the early days. It's kind of drifted where it created some negative incentives, and that's also being resolved. And so I'm happy with where Solana's validator set is today, and I see a lot of low-hanging fruit to continue improving it.
Yeah, I remember when I first got more deeply involved in Solana. I've been in crypto 10 plus years, so Bitcoin first and then ETH, and so with Bitcoin, I drove my wife and kids crazy with a Bitcoin miner in the basement, making no money. And then when ETH came along, I did the same thing because I wanted to get my hands dirty. When I first got into Solana, I was like, oh, I'll do the same thing. And then you load up the validator requirements, okay, I can get a PC with this, that, and that, but I've got to have this, Giga. And so it's the thing that also makes Solana works, right? It's one of the reasons why it's such a high-performant chain. So it's this balance of centralization and decentralization. In a Nirvana-like world, it would be great if validators could be more open, to be able to participate in the network, could be more of a consumer or prosumer experience. But I don't, that's something that's not on the roadmap. In the meantime, I think Solana has done an excellent job with the help of companies like us and Jito and you in diversifying the amount of ways that validators can get involved, either from a business model standpoint or technically, such that the idea that Solana is not decentralized is kind of a myth now. We've proven that it's not, but there's still always work to be done to do that.
Well, okay, to close this out, maybe let's talk about the future, some aspirational goals of where you would like to see your respective companies within the context of helping the ecosystem in terms of staking, institutional staking, and whatnot. Let's say 2-year time horizon.
Yeah. On a few verticals, like I think there's substantial room for improvement in the MEV infrastructure on Solana. And the system has worked very well. Again, it's distributed a lot of capital that wouldn't exist without Jito's infrastructure solutions of, over $1 billion. But it needs to be more transparent and it needs to be more decentralized. And so that is a key goal, and hopefully it solves a lot of the negative externalities like sandwiching that were discussed earlier. So I think that is very achievable within the next 2 years. I think there's also a lot of the core protocol changes that relate to decentralization and make running a validator much more obtainable. And for JitoSol specifically, I think continue growing, and in particular, liquid staking on Solana remains a small percentage of total stake, and that is slowly growing as people see the utility in that, and as people come around to kind of the benefits of that model. And so I think there's going to be significant growth in liquid staking adoption generally amongst the new entrants into kind of the Solana space, which are some of the more traditional institutions and just kind of other players that may not even be making a bet on the Solana price, but are getting involved in it in the traditional finance trading sense. And so I think excited to see JitoSol end up in those hands, and hopefully, with a model of delegation that will end up trickling through to a lot of the best performing validators on Solana and continue improving the network.
Yeah, so I'd say the 2-year time horizon for us is we're laser focused on institutions. So we recently got our SOC 2, which is an incredibly sexy process for anyone who hasn't gone through it. We're integrated with Zodia and Copper with native staking, and yesterday we announced that integration with BitGo. So we're very excited to have, this multi-validator model for U.S. institutions, a qualified custodian with a partner like BitGo. And we're aggressively focused on the other custodians and helping launch institutions that want to launch responsible products for Solana staking, have us be their partner. So that's where we're going to be in the next 2 years. At the same time, focusing on the validator ecosystem and making sure that, the validators that participate in the Marinade network, some of whom have been with us for, 2+ 3 years, continue to see value and in participating in that network.
Cool. Anything else you guys want to cover in the last 50 seconds? Yeah. Oh.
What's your next tweet going to be?
My next tweet.
Solana.
Yeah, probably about Solana. That'd be a good one. Yeah. All right. Cool. Thank you.